Okay, we are rolling. Great, okay, get all this stuff here. Okay, so I'm here with Susan Tait. Thank you very much for doing this interview, Susan.
You're welcome, thank you.
And the date today is May 10th, 2017, and the time is 11:26 a.m.
Yes.
Just like to take a second, relax, shake it all off. Susan, why don't we start with tell me where you were born?
I was born in Vancouver. And then, because my father was an air traffic controller, we moved, and I went to kindergarten in Pat Bay, and back to Vancouver, to Goose Bay, Labrador, back to Vancouver.
Did your parents tell you anything about the day you were born, what day of the week it was, or what time you were born?
Oh yes, I have all that. I can't remember. My mentor is a very highly qualified astrologer, so she's got it all.
Okay.
Yeah, I just trust what she says. I'm on the right path.
And tell me about your parents. Where were they born and what were they like?
My father was born in Portage la Prairie, and I think they had not difficult, but not wealthy by any means upbringing. And he was an athlete. He was a champion runner, long distance runner, and I think he loved to run. And he joined the Air Force and volunteered to go overseas, but they landed up in the Charlottes. I think I could check that, but I think they were in the Charlottes. And then after the war, he was one of the very first people to join up with the air traffic control at the very beginning. And so I think he was a pioneer in that. He took it very seriously, and as you must, but that wasn't so easy for us there was a strictness. You couldn't exaggerate, that sort of thing. He was very much an outdoors person, and thank goodness they bought property over here, just so he could fish and garden and those things. My mom was she was born in Winnipeg, and she joined the Air Force when she was 19. She had her 19th birthday in Florida doing her training, and she got sent to Newfoundland, which was overseas at that time. And she was one of those girls you saw moving things around on the big map in the war, and that's somehow they all came out to Vancouver. I can't remember how, and met because my grandparents had a big house, and they had people, usually a young man from the services as a boarder. My grandfather was always bringing people home for lunch or dinner, and so my dad was the boarder, and so boom, they got married. And she was great, Mom. She sewed all our clothes until we were big enough to do it ourselves. She was a great cook, really creative, and so I, as the eldest, was there with her in the kitchen until I was big enough to want to do that all myself. As soon as we were big enough, she went to UBC and took tons and tons of pottery classes, and was a really accomplished stoneware potter. And she did that up until just after my dad died, and she'd had the kids for the summer after I was in India, and she went, "Oh, I have so much work to do for the Christmas market." And then she said, "No, I don't," and had the studio demolished and turned into a painting studio and took up painting. She was great. I think she was one of the sort of matriarchal figures on the island. She just died 3 years ago. She was on her own. She was able to live on her own in her own house, painting up until the week she died. You must do something creative every day. That's, she said that. It was a big pressure. So she was a wonderful woman to have come from and to follow.
What do you remember about your first house or apartment that you grew up in?
I remember. I think when we got transferred, Dad got transferred to Pat Bay, to the airport there, and we lived, I think I was in kindergarten, and it was on the base there where the controllers lived, and the first house we lived in was the fire hall, had been, and it had a huge, great kitchen, and garage that was great for my dad, and it was very. There's no lots of place to run around and garden, and I just had a thought looking at you of remembering when Dad got transferred to Goose Bay, and we were in the first group of air traffic controllers up there. So they had built this whole row of duplexes, and so there were controllers from all over the country there with their families, and it seemed like everybody had 4 kids. In the next duplex to us, not attached, were the Stanleys. Harry Stanley and Marv and Doug. He was the same age as my youngest sister. And so I even babysat for him when I was like 9. He thinks that's hysterical, so do I.
That is pretty funny.
Yeah. So to find us all living here on Pender is, yeah.
That's neat.
It is neat.
And what was school like back then?
School? School.
I guess we can start with like elementary school. What was it like back then? At that time?
It was fun. I loved it. It was. I remember mostly I do remember before we went to Labrador, so I was perhaps in grade 3. Or were we back? It was anyway I was in Southlands in Dunbar, Point Grey, and I loved school, but I remembered one day of getting really worried. It must have been in grade 6. We were studying somehow the Civil War, and I had an aunt in South Dakota, and I got all panicky about that. So I left the class, got excused from the class, went up to the principal's office and phoned home and said, "Get her out of there." I had no concept of, really this was a long time ago. But I was good at school, so it was mostly fun.
And what were some of your favorite subjects?
English, biology, the sciences of the home economics, both of those, those things.
And when you were younger, what did you want to be when you grew up?
I had no idea. No idea. I knew that I just didn't want to go to university for the sake of going, because I didn't have a clear notion of what I wanted to do, except that I didn't want to end up in an ordinary box. I just knew that. So I didn't.
I think everyone on Pender has that same feeling.
Exactly. I could never have projected the life that's gone on in between. Never.
I don't think anyone really can.
No.
And when you got a bit older, when you were a teenager, what kind of stuff did you get up to when you were for fun?
Oh, the beach.
Love the beach.
Yeah. Yeah, mostly the beach. Anything to do with water. We played tennis and all those kind of things, but yeah, it was the water. I think we made a career out of going to the beach in the summer. You know, sort of 8 hours a day, which you did. Until I was working.
And what did you do after high school?
After high school, well, it still wasn't, I didn't have a clear notion of what I wanted to do. So my mother, bless her, actually said, all right, then you do one thing. You should go to secretarial college and get that under your belt. And she didn't probably put it like that, but that was about the best advice ever. I actually enjoy those things, and I did it well. It wasn't painful for me, and so that's been a sort of a grounding. There weren't computers. We had to be able to run every different kind of business machine. You'd have to go to a museum to look at them all by touch. You couldn't look at all, and they were all laid out differently, and be able to type really fast and do shorthand. That I didn't do, but I loved it. It was like it was a game. So, but those really basic skills, together with the ones that I learned from just from mom, and then from majoring in science at school. So then I slipped in the home economics because they were great. Those things, sewing, cooking, and being able to type like fury, have enabled me to just keep myself alive anywhere. So get your basic skills down pat. Then you're free. No matter if you don't know, you're just free to then pursue whatever other thing might come along. If you don't have a pure passion right from the get-go.
Did you have any pets growing up?
Nope. Fish. Just fish.
And was your mom or your dad more strict growing up?
My dad.
Your dad was more strict.
Well, he was more vocally strict. We just had great shouting battles, and I tended to defend myself and the other little ones if I felt they needed defending. But my mom, all she had to do was lift her eyebrow. That's it. And you just knew. Even people at the Pender Post say that at the table on the board. If my mom was sitting at the other end, she just lifted her eyebrow. I was like, oh, you're in trouble.
And you knew what she was
You
doing.
knew. You just knew.
Did you know your grandparents?
Yes, my mother's parents. We had a lot of contact with them.
Where were they from? What were they like?
The Winnipeg, and there was a whole gang of relatives on my mother's side, not my father's so much. There was a smaller family, and one sister lived in North Van, and their daughters, and that was kind of that. But my mom's family her parents had 3 kids. Mom had 4 kids. Her brother had 4 kids, and her sister had 8 kids. So there's 16 grandchildren. I'm the eldest, and declared matriarch. I've just done that. So there were lots and lots of family stuff. And one generation, like further in my grandparents' generation, they had all moved out from Winnipeg. I think it started with one sibling coming out, and everybody else was like, I'm also coming. So they all came out here. And then we had 2 brothers married 2 sisters. So that somehow made the whole family tree really tight. And yeah, it was good. It was always really nice with them, not difficult like you hear people say with Christmas dinners being something to avoid.
Well, tell me about your siblings. How many siblings do you have, and did you guys always get along? Or were there troublesome times ever? And what memories do you have of them when you were growing up?
Well, there were 3 girls. There are 3 girls. So we were close when we were growing up. When we were in Vancouver, we had the upstairs of the house. It was like a great open T, and it was just like the girls' dorm up there. But I was the oldest, so it's so different from everybody's perspective in the family. We have one brother, and so but he was downstairs. He was really physically separated from us, and actually kept physically separated from us by like my dad. He wasn't allowed to roughhouse with us, which was kind of good, but kind of too bad. And it's got this balance. Only because I never learned that kind of play, the non-sexual physical play, which is now I did, but it was we adored him, still do. He's just it. He's a perfect brother. He's the one who drew me to come to India, and now I talk to him. We don't necessarily talk, but just even text back and forth now that we can do that almost every day. So,
tell me more about how you decided to go to India. How did that come about?
I didn't sit down and decide it. It was just like a pull. Knew that there was the moment in 1974 when John left. It was all happened in 1 month. When Mom and Dad moved over here, John left. My son was born. My other sister got married, the youngest, but I was too pregnant to go. Everybody couldn't be involved with anybody else's performance. So John was gone for 12 years, and we didn't see him, except right at the beginning because he got really sick and they had to send him home. So it just grew. All the time I was married, it wasn't possible. When I left my first husband, as soon as it was physically possible, I was with somebody else, and thank goodness he couldn't go with me, wouldn't. So as soon as I was alone, I worked really, really hard and got the money and went. I just jumped. I thought, and then I got thinking, somehow this journey is really important. I was a little bit older than you, not much, 38, and I just thought, India was so far away. I really didn't want to just get on the plane and poof, be there. I wanted the journey to be part of it. So that's why I got the notion that, I'd like to go sailing part way. That also was crazy because I'd never sailed in blue water before. Only just, Gulf Island sailing. And so it just fell into place that I met a man who had a friend who was sailing down the coast, and I went with them. I did.
That was neat.
It was.
Do you remember where, exactly where you landed when you decided to travel there?
Yes, in Madras. When we finished sailing, got down to the border of Mexico, and then I said, okay, now I have to go. So they took me to the airport in San Diego, and I got a ticket and went San Diego, Madras.
And what was that like? What were your first few experiences?
Oh, of course, you arrive in the middle of the night because that's how the flights go. My brother was there. I was scared. I was kind of scared about meeting him. I knew he had said he wanted me to come. People were waiting for me, but John had always been so kind of a, not superior, but so good, clean, clear, studious. Yeah, I adored him. But it's like, I was more ordinary, got into piles of trouble, and he didn't. And was he going to like me? I was scared about that. So then when I got there, and that was just completely disappeared. So we drove, and the taxi ride from Madras to Oroville used to take 4 hours of a really scary road. And so we drove a good part of the night and just talked and talked and slept and talked and stopped for tea because there were little tea shops all along the road. And when we arrived at Oroville, he took me to the guest house. It was like the jungle, covered up with the big banyan tree, and it was warm and smelled flowers. It was beautiful, beautiful.
And what was your first experience of India like?
It was clearly, it felt like alright, you're on a different planet. It's like obvious, but that it felt like a home place. Mm-hmm. It was almost like, the thing about the briar patch. No, I didn't want to go to India. Oops, you're there, and I just fell in love with the whole everything.
What about it did you fall in love with?
Everything, the people, the warmth, it was October, so it was warm, it was humid, the beautiful tropical scent to everything. I fell in love with just the air, and then with a man. Of course, it's one of the hooks that gets you to those kind of places, anywhere, and also because it's an international community, experimental, human unity. We talked about those things before. Human unity, unending education, with the concept of man as an evolutionary being, doing that work, but in the world, not cloistered away somewhere. So it's a fascinating experiment to have like 500 people from 42 countries at that time trying to make this out of a hard red desert. And so I consciously signed myself up to be an ingredient. It's like, yeah, I'll come and play, work, be there. It was much more pioneering at that stage. People were still planting trees it changed the climate, because it actually was a hard red desert. It had been classified apparently as uninhabitable when the first people came overland by caravan from France, from Europe in the 60s. And yeah, first thing was get water, put up a shelter, start planting trees, start planting gardens, start the very first things of pioneering.
You mentioned you fell in love with the people there. Did you notice a big difference when you went there? I guess in the sense of how people acted here and how people were there. Like a cultural difference.
It seemed that each culture, even though
like friendlier or less friendly, or
people, different cultures, some of them seemed less friendly, but they weren't really. They just seemed it. And so that was something to learn. But actually, each culture is different in how they look at you, how they speak to you, how they are, even when they're just standing all by themselves. So that was, it was interesting too. And one of the first works I had volunteered into was as a photographer, because I had 3 cameras, two cameras. I had cameras. So therefore, you're a photographer. And so I worked with a newspaper, an internal newspaper, and we met once a month, and I would have assignments to go and photograph, go to the top of the windmill, go here, go there. So I very often in a day found myself on both two sides of almost any given fence with people who might be against or clash against each other a bit. But I was meeting them on a more intimate setting, not political, not anything. I was just there to photograph, and so it was a wonderful way to meet people and kind of get into the community, move easily.
Tell me a little bit about your work. Do you remember some of the your first job?
I do.
Tell me a bit about that.
It wasn't very exciting, but when I finished the secretarial college, even though I was very good at everything, but I did play hooky, but I don't get caught. So, but they knew that because we had to account for all our time because it was an accounting program too. So I was actually about the only one who got recommended for a job. So I worked for, I think it's Bose. It was a confectionery supply house on Hamilton Street in Vancouver. It was a big manual typewriter, heavy thing, and it's a great warehouse out behind because you had to make the orders, make all the invoices and things, but it was for bakery supplies and like Dairy Queen, all those places. So there were nuts and candies and chocolate and all kinds of things in the warehouse. It was great. I didn't work there very long, but it was, and didn't get paid very much. But it was a good leaping off into now I am working and supporting myself, and it was good.
And what other kind of work did you do? And how did you get into artisan work and writing?
How did that happen? All along I was making a lot of my own clothes because I just did. And I worked for, some of the work I liked the best was working for consulting engineers. And I did end up going up north to the Mica Dam for almost 10 years and was married up there. Ashley was born up there. I went for that job interview because I was fed up to the teeth with the yacht club and the tennis club and too many men thinking that it was time to get married, that kind of thing. So when that job interview came up, I said, I'll go, and left town and was married within a month. It was, couldn't escape. That's biology, right? It wasn't wrong. That was Ashley's father. It was a big adventure. We escaped. We actually eloped off and went to Reno and got married, and just went for the weekend because we had to be back at work on Monday. But you had to get married then. You couldn't just live together. It was 1970. It was at the very beginning of people starting to not have to be married to live together. But it was a company town, so there was a town manager, not a mayor, and you weren't allowed to cohabit without being married. And so then, after I eventually left, came back to Vancouver, I got a job working for Alex Harrison with Harrison Galleries. I had known him before I went. We had worked for him as a teenager, serving wine at exhibitions, that kind of thing. And so I did, and eventually ended up managing one of his galleries on South Granville. And it was then, I think, that I started the beginning of doing quilting with a technique that I devised, not just applique or putting things together, and having an exhibition in kits with those. But then when I'd be sewing quilts and then think, I want to find a way to wear this. And so then I made a coat. And then when I went into the gallery one day and I wore my coat just because I wore my coat, and they said, would you do a fashion show for us? And I said, sure. And then went home and went, oh no. So what did you say? So that coincided with, so I had 6 months. Then I had to make a collection of clothes. So at that time, I was there, and then Mom and Dad were here, and my dad was not beginning to be really not well. So they asked if I would come over here, and so I said sure, because then I was being independent with my work, and so I moved over and made the collection of clothes for that show. And I ended up sharing a job. I needed to work also at the same time, so Clam Bay needed a cook, so I was the cook at Clam Bay. It was just great fun. It was probably, I'm not exactly sure, maybe 83, and I was responsible for taking care of the farm manager, sort of like a wife with no privileges of his, and also for when the owner would bring people over on the weekends from the city, then I cooked for them also, and prepared for the show. So I ended up giving half my job to Kim Davis's first wife, Corinne Davis, who was also in the same exhibition as me in Vancouver. So we were sharing, first job sharing, and yeah, it was just a super time. At that time, I think Clam Bay was one of the biggest employers on the island. There were like 9 of us. It was crazy. We worked really hard. We had stupid amounts of fun, and yes, it was a beautiful time. Even at the beginning of that, they really needed a cook. They really wanted me. And so Bob Blennerhassett, for the first while, they needed me a cook so badly, he would come and pick me up and drive me to work, and then sold me one of his cars. Yeah, it was so different being on the island as part of the single working adults in their 30s, rather than visiting my parents for summers when they lived down there. And so just spending 6 weeks here in the summer, and we even played golf. Because I love the golf course, but I never golfed. And fishing with my dad, and spending time on the beach. But working, that's when you really experience the island in a different way. Anywhere, but it was, on the island in your 30s in the 80s was yeah, it was good fun. I learned a lot too of experience. An island is a special place, and you couldn't learn things about like caring for people in a different way. You couldn't, if I did something stupid, you wouldn't probably say, Susan is stupid, I'm not going to ever talk to her again. You would go, Susan did something stupid yesterday.
I think I've been there a few times.
I'm sure. So you couldn't just go get in your car and go away because there's no ferry. Yeah. So, and also coming from this city, I was a very civilized girl, and went to work in high heels and all dressed up every day, and maybe took a cab to work, and so going to Browning at that time was kind of like everybody's living room. There were people that, I don't know if it was a little more pioneering at that stage because there were only like 500-600 people here. So there were a lot of people who were living a little rougher. I know there still are, but that didn't have electricity or a bathtub or those things, and uh, were building houses and doing really necessary, wonderful work, but looked rougher and maybe more scary because they were just really honestly who they were. So those people who looked like that in the city, I probably wouldn't cross their paths very much. And I might have been a little nervous. But here you found out that it's not like that at all. They were the most really wonderful, gentle, maybe even highly educated, but just looked like that. And it was very, very good experience for me. Also, that when I came, I was a little bit afraid because I had come from recently, I don't know how that ever happened, but one of those violent relationships. So I was scared just scared that it was going to get me. So the police said, "No, to worry, he won't." But the boys, and I remember it being Doug and Kim Davis, said to me, "Right, we are going to Kung Fu. You come with us." So I did. And I don't remember how long it lasted, but we went twice a week, and it was so much fun. It was so hard, but I learned that play, the physical play with them, and it was such a, it was not dramatic, but it was just a switch of, I didn't walk around being afraid only of that one person, but I certainly never did again, and it allowed me to step into situations that needed stepping into. I knew probably you'll get hurt, but at least I'm not just gonna have to take it. So aside from those martial arts being such a wonderful thing for your head and for your body both, I loved the experience. Like a dance, really difficult, not things you would usually just walk around doing.
Mm-hmm.
So that was like, thank you to those boys.
And tell me about some of the, tell me what the work you're doing now is. The artisan work.
Well, I physically got sort of ground to a halt after I had a back injury that had surgery. That worked really well, but then I had a couple of falls and you're just toast physically. So I had to stop for a time. I think I'll be able to start again doing I was painting on the glass, which was so much fun. Those things I had to just stop because I couldn't sit and do them. So I was able to finish my book, because you can do that lying down. I did that lying down. And that's just been published. And so now we'll begin the different part of that work around the book, and what to do with it. How far do I want to go? What do I... Yeah, it's at the bookstore here, and that's super fun, and they ran out a couple of times, and hooray. But now you have to think of that's business too. So there's that side of it. And so I'm trying to be a bit, not beat myself up, be I do have some treatment in the offing for my spine, so I'll just wait till that happens. That's only next month. That's very soon. And then see what happens. See what I feel to do. Will I go back? The book of that will be ongoing. That's an ongoing work. I'm not sure what artistic thing I'll pursue, but it definitely will be something.
Can you talk a little bit about how the book came about?
Yes, if I have a sip of tea, I can tell you.
Good idea.
I just about the whole time I was in India, I wrote because you just did. There wasn't any well, there was outside entertainment, but in the evenings you were just you, and it was just quiet and no television or phone or anything. So I wrote, and I wrote letters and notebooks. I just filled them up, and I kept them all. And even right in the middle of when I was in Oroville, I remember being told, Susan, you have to write a book, when things started happening. And I thought, maybe someday I will do that. But I just kept on writing and just kept everything. And that was said several times to me. And so when I came back to Canada, that I was kind of a surprise that I'm back. I didn't consciously make the decision to come back to Canada. I had a return ticket when I arrived here, and by circumstances didn't use it. I haven't been back yet. But I had all those notebooks. So it was when I had the energy, I thought, well, I love to type anyway, so get those things. Just don't think about it. Just transcribe everything into the computer. So I did that. And then I was, just for kind of curiosity, hooked up with a writing group, and it was like Tuesday afternoon story time, and people said, you have to do it. So, and then as it kind of carried on, so I was aiming at it, getting it kind of in shape. I didn't change the writing, but some things were kind of just, should be just taken totally out. But then when I had that interview with Shaw, and we sat on the couch there at the end, and she pretty much said, and she's written a book. And I thought, oh no, now actually I should do it. And she recommended a publisher in Victoria. She said that they will love you and you will love them. And so I just called them up and then got to work. Yeah, I don't know what the hell. It took some time, and it was really quite a lot of work, but I'm so happy that I did it, that it's published. And it was I'm not scared of opening up and telling people things, but I know that for some people it will be more than or maybe more difficult than they want to even approach. That's completely fine. I'm not wanting everybody to read it, just if they want to read it.
What were some of the challenges that you had when completing the book and having it published? What were some of the biggest challenges that you faced?
Mm-hmm. Well, having my hip surgery, before that was even more, the surgery's the easy part, is before that that's difficult. So huge amounts of pain, and then cataracts and angle closure glaucoma as a little surprise. So I couldn't see very well at all. I had to on the computer page, I'd bring it up as big as possible, and then it still was looking like ghosting and double. But in the end, I think it was really, really hard, but I think it made me be more careful with the editing because I couldn't just read along. I had to really, really struggle with it. It was hard. Yeah.
And you spoke a little bit about actually taking the steps to get it done. A lot of people have lots of people have books in mind or projects that they'd like to do. What do you think it was, or would you like to talk a little bit more? Talk a little bit more about um, what it was that um, helped you complete it, create it into completion.
The publisher did. They were wonderful. It's Friesen Press. Yes, hugely great help. You can. I I went to meet them and we talked, and then there's so much guidance with them, and you can choose however much involvement with it you want from them. You don't just hand over their manuscript and say print it. You can probably do that, but I had several editorial processes and several go rounds of that editorially, and then with the book design and cover design. I didn't even know those were two different things, but they are. And yeah, just keep with it. Yeah, just gotta keep with it.
And what advice would you have for young authors or artists that are trying to make it, in their passionate fields or whatever their projects are?
One of the voices in me that's been the constant, even if I didn't know about, I wasn't sure about how to do what I was going to do, is called never mind, just start. That's it. Never mind, just start.
Well, I think that was quite a. I think we've got a lot of good stuff here. I'd like to thank you very much, Susan Tait, for doing this interview. I think it was a real special interview.
Thank you, Chantal.
I really appreciated that. And I think we'll end it there.
Okay.